Hello and welcome to our Summer Scares YA panel. This is Kelly Jensen, Senior Editor at Book Riot. Before we begin, I'd like to talk about some of the technical details of today's program. A link to 2026 Summer Scares Programming Guide was included in the reminder email you received from Zoom about an hour ago. To download it, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the link located there. If you have any trouble, please contact Booklist at webinars@booklistonline.com. The audience is set to listen only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need a technical assistance, simply click Q&A and type your message in the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we will pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. Booklist offers closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable them on your screen, please look for and click the Show Captions icon on the toolbar mentioned earlier. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of them at any time by selecting Caption Settings. And finally, Booklist expects all participants to maintain an atmosphere of respect and fairness. Anyone who violates this standard of behavior, including engaging in any form of harassment, may, at the discretion of the organizers, be immediately removed. We'd like to start today's webinar with a brief introduction about the Summer Scares program. For those of you unfamiliar, the Summer Scares reading list includes titles selected by a panel of authors and librarians, and it's designed to promote horror as a great reading option for all ages and during any time of the year. The program is designed by the Horror Writers Association in partnership with iREAD, Book Riot, NoveList, and Booklist. As I mentioned earlier, we sent a link to the 2026 Summer Scares Programming Guide in the reminder email, but please feel free to ask for that in the Q&A box if you are unable to locate it. We'd be happy to share it with you. Let's get to the real reason we're here today, which is our wonderful books. We are really excited to have the pleasure of hearing from two of our authors on the panel today. Anne Fraistat, author of What We Harvest from Delacorte Press, and Amparo Ortiz, co-editor of Our Shadows Have Claws from Little Brown Books for Young Readers. We will hear a brief presentation from each panelist about their book and then move to the Q&A portion of the webinar. Unfortunately, Yamile and Linda are not able to join us today, but the good news is we're not only going to discuss their books, both have sent us answers to the questions, so we will have them represented on the panel. Amparo will represent Yamile, and Becky Spratford will be playing the role of Linda Cheng today. And with that, we begin the program with a brief introduction to Linda Cheng's book, Gorgeous Gruesome Faces. Though, like I said, Linda cannot be here today as she's traveling, I'm thrilled to say she shared her answers to all the panel questions, so you'll hear from her through Becky throughout the presentation. But a little bit about her book. Sunny is part of a K-pop trio that is rocketing up the charts. The band got its start thanks to a Disney-style television show. Her two fellow bandmates slash co-stars are Candy and Mina, and in the midst of a scandal related to Sunny and another K-pop star, Mina dies right in front of them. Sunny had always suspected it had something to do with the secrets between Mina and Candy. Fast forward 2 years, and with questions still remaining about Mina's death, Sunny hears that Candy might be trying out to be part of a new K-pop band. So Sunny does what anyone would do in this situation. She follows Candy to the K-pop workshop, and while there, Sunny keeps getting otherworldly visions and experiences and realizes the only way to get to the bottom of Mina's death is to tell some ugly secrets. This is a horror meets thriller book set in the glossy world of K-pop. It's a fun one with a neat supernatural element that layers so nicely atop the worlds of K-pop and reality TV. And now I'm going to pass over the mic to Anne Fraistat, author of What We Harvest. Welcome, Anne. Please tell us about your book.
Hi, everyone. Okay, I am Anne Fraistat. I am the author of two YA horror novels. I brought props. So I'll get to What We Harvest in a sec. I just want to share the most recent as well as A Place for Vanishing. And this one is contemporary Gothic horror. I like to describe it as a mental health recovery story told inside a haunted house. So the vibes are very like Coraline meets Haunting of Hill House. Um, and now what I'm here to talk about. So this is what we harvest. What we harvest is about this seemingly idyllic small American farming town where the farms have these magic tinged, miraculous crops like iridescent wheat with healing properties, glowing melons, things like that. Until a mysterious blight comes up from the soil and it starts infecting first the crops and then the animals and then the neighbors. So their eyes fog white and they run off into the forest. And then they come back at night very different from how they were before. And so at the start of the book, our main character, Wren, is one of the last locals standing, and the blight has actually just hit her farm. So her miraculous wheat is dying. Her parents are nowhere to be found. And pretty quickly, she gets worried that she may have actually inhaled some of the blight and she may be infected. And if that's true, she has very little time. So she kind of desperately needs help here. And the only one for her to turn to is naturally her estranged ex from the neighboring farm. So together, they're fighting to save their farms and their family and to unearth the root of the blight before there's nothing left to fight for. So this is zombie folk horror. It's a book about buried sins, about broken American dreams, about nature turning against us. And importantly, it's also about fighting back against those avalanching odds as well. So if you like things like The Last of Us or Annihilation, then this could be a good match for you. And I'll just read the first page to give you all like the sense of it. All right, so this is chapter 1, page 1. So it had finally come to kill us too. The sickest part was I'd started to believe we were invincible, that somehow the miracle of our farm might protect us. I'd seen Rainbow Fields survive crackling lightning, hail, devouring army worms, eye spot fungus. No matter what came from sky or earth, the field behind our house still swayed with towering iridescent wheat, crimson, orange, yellow, all the way to my favorite, twilight blazed violet. Each section winked with its own sheen. My whole life, the wheat had soothed me to sleep through my bedroom window with its rustling whispers, sweeter than any lullaby, or at least any my mom knew. My whole life until now, when I realized even rainbows could rot. I stood at the very back of our field. A gust of wind caught my hair, and the cascading waves of wheat flickered into a rainbow, then stilled back into a field of shivering white gold. At my feet, a sickly ooze crept from their roots. It wound up their shafts and dripped from their tips. A quicksilver blight, we called it, because it gleamed like molten metal. But the stench gave it away for what it really was, a greedy, hungry rot. All right, I'll stop there for now. That is what we harvest. And I'm super excited to be here with you all today.
Thank you so much, Anne, for joining us and for sharing that first portion of your book. I loved this one. I loved all the descriptions and just how evocative it was. And like throughout, you feel that foreboding, like each and every page. I'm going to pass it over now to Amparo Ortiz, co-editor of Our Shadows Have Claws. Take it away, Amparo.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And as Kelly said, I am one of the editors of Our Shadows Have Claws. Let me see if you can see it. There it is. This is a young adult horror anthology that I came up with the idea for back in 2020, if I'm not mistaken, and I ran with it. I really wanted to focus on a project that was for young adults mostly and about young adults living across Latin America. And this includes diaspora children in the United States, but we have a greater focus on specific mythical creatures that are not as popular as one would think the chupacabra is, or La Llorona, for example. We really wanted to focus on these monsters that are very famous or popularly spoken about in our homes, our schools, our neighborhoods, but the mainstream hasn't caught up to them yet. And we have 15 stories. Most of them are from Puerto Rico, and that's my fault. I am from Puerto Rico as well. But my co-editor, Yamile Saied Méndez, is from Argentina. We have Argentina, Uruguay, Cuba. We have the Dominican Republic, Haiti. We have Mexico, and we have Colombia and Brazil represented. And I will also be reading a little bit from this anthology. I really wanted to start with Chantel Acevedo's story. She's our first contributor in the lineup, and she is writing a Romeo and Juliet retelling from a Cuban's perspective. So here we go. They say our myths are born in the rivers and valleys, in the mist-cloaked mogotes of Viñales, and the cold caves of Matanzas. They say our myths are open-mouthed screams, rows of jagged teeth, fiery balls of light, and mothers in mourning. Our myths are also this: a whispered te veo when nobody is around, a giggle in the night, a dirty rag around your throat. Whatever the campesinos tell you about our myths, you'd better believe them, for they are formed of blood and sacrifice, torment and star-crossed love. But be warned, this story is both a lesson and a curse. Most stories are. And that's it.
Thank you, Amparo. And I love an anthology. And there are surprisingly few YA anthologies that are horror based. There are few YA horror anthologies. And so from the start, seeking out those short story collections has always been like one of the things I look at when I'm on this panel. But I also want collections that represent cultural horrors that aren't as well known in America by the average, the average white reader, right? Or even people of a diverse background may not be familiar with these stories, or they are, and they're looking for that opportunity to like engage in these stories that they're familiar with. And what I loved about your collection is it had a little bit of everything. There were so many different types of stories, different perspectives. The voices were all different. And each time I got to the end of one story and went to the next one, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to get. And there's something as a reader that is just so enjoyable about that because there's that surprise element to it. And also, these are monster stories, which is something that the more I think about it, again, not a huge part of YA literature, even though monster stories are phenomenally popular globally. I was so excited to honor this book as well, and thank you for sharing a passage from it so people could get a little taste of that story. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera on. And Anne, do you want to turn yours on it as well? We can move on to the panel portion of our webinar. And also, our Linda has turned on her camera as well. And so we'll start. This is going to be a fun conversation, mostly softball questions and chatting about how much we love horror and just how awesome horror is right now. So my first question for all the panelists is, can you talk about why you love horror, both as a fan and as a writer? What is it specifically about horror that you love to explore?
I can go first for Linda since she hasn't spoken yet. She has a great answer. As a fan, horror is pure fun for me. It's the thrill of going into a haunted house with a group of friends, the anticipation before the big drop on a roller coaster. I love the excitement and the mystery of the unknown. Horror is both escapist and a comfort genre for me. As a writer, horror is cathartic and freeing, a way to explore darkness and discomfort in a controlled space. For a genre that centers on fear, I think horror writers are some of the most fearless risk takers when it comes to their work. And it's where some of the most original and transgressive fiction is happening, particularly with marginalized and queer voices. Horror fiction tackles uncomfortable truths head on. And in dark times like now, when we are forced to confront horrific things daily, as a marginalized person and as an immigrant, I find horror fiction cathartic, powerful, and affirming. Thank you, Linda.
That was beautiful. I love that. Yeah, I feel like I've been a horror fan for a really long time. Like, I feel like I was a pretty young kid when I first started connecting with horror, and I think that's actually true for a lot of folks. And I actually think it makes a lot of sense. Like, I've got a toddler now, and so I'm seeing her imagination just coming online, and I'm seeing how imagination and fear arrive hand in hand. It's like with the dreams come nightmares, and we all have them. And uh, for me, too, what Linda was saying about it being fun and also a comfort genre makes a lot of sense to me. Horror's long been a safe space for me to process that kind of anxiety. And I think as a creator, it was kind of a strange thing for me because so people actually knew me as a comedic playwright before I started writing horror novels. And so some people were pretty confused about this like seeming dark turn. But it's actually something that, Jordan Peele has discussed a lot is that there's a lot more in common between horror and comedy than there might at first seem. They're both deeply visceral. That's something I love about horror. They both get in our bodies, making us like laugh or jump or shiver, and they also exaggerate to flag the truth of our current reality. Horrific as that current reality may be, we might not have to exaggerate quite as much anymore. And they both, I think, they suggest a better way that the world could be. One thing I believe deeply about horror is that it's this unparalleled genre actually for delivering hope and for showcasing resilience, because it can take characters to the darkest, deepest places and then lift them out of that. And even when it doesn't, when the worst does happen, as it does in many horrors, I still think there's something inherently hopeful that happens when the horror ends. When you close the book or you turn off the TV and you get to appreciate what you have. Horror, I think, helps us appreciate what we have and it helps us understand what we need.
Fully agree with everything said. I am going to share Shamile's answer first because she's way more eloquent than me anyway. So, Shamile says, I've been a fan of horror since I was a young girl growing up in Argentina, since I came upon a copy of Salem's Lot and watched the Narciso Ibañez Mentas shows and movies that indeed kept me up many nights, but I couldn't stop watching. Horror gives you the opportunity to face monsters from a safe perspective, both as a reader and a writer, and it's just so much fun. I fully agree with what she says. In my case, personally, I think I have two answers. As a fan or as a person, I love horror because I learn a lot about how to survive through it. I know a lot of it is very much fantasy, not real, what have you, but I'm a visual learner when it comes to physical activities. So if you tell me to run from one place to another, I'm not going to know exactly how to do that, especially if I'm under stress. So I need to see like how other people are solving problems so that I can be like, would I solve that problem that way? Maybe not. I would probably just cry. And as a writer, I have always been so obsessed with how people think and how they interpret the reality around them, because that's just such a subjective thing and not everyone is going to think the same things, feel the same feelings in the same ways. And as a writer, you're always trying to absorb as many realities as you can. So yeah.
These are all such great answers. And really speak to, I think, one thing I think about a lot when I think about horror is that so often it's categorized as a genre as opposed to a mood, and we miss just how incredibly dynamic horror is because it applies across genres, right? And you had mentioned the connection between humor and horror, and I see the same thing. Like that is the thing I think about because very much the same way, humor applies across genres. So there's so many ways to play with getting in somebody's feelings and like getting a reaction out of them. It's beautiful.
Well, and when we work with teens, they understand that horror goes across genres better because one thing I love about teens and working with them is they are in touch with their feelings. It is still okay to be in touch with them. And one of the worst things about helping adults is they try to keep their emotions out of things. And they're like the perfect age to write for, I think, for horror, because you can get everything in there and they're willing to go with you on the journey.
1000%. So, I think everybody kind of touched upon early exposure to horror and like that sort of planting a seed for being so passionate about it. So I'm just going to go ahead and ask, do you remember what your first exposure to horror was? Was it a film? Was it a book? Can you remember how it made you feel?
Yeah, okay, I'll jump in. Yeah, I think I remember a few things. So first off, I was definitely a Goosebumps girl. I had a long stretch where it was like all I would read, and it was kind of a problem. So um, I remember that as being just honestly like fun and like just that almost that popcorn quality of just wanting to turn the pages and experience the stories and just be immersed in them. I remember scarier versions of that coming from like scary stories to tell in the dark as a young one with just like, I mean, I feel like the iconic, absurdly haunting illustrations. I remember that one as being a little more of a thrill. Did you all remember the story The Window in that collection? Does anyone remember that? It's like there's a girl who's in her bedroom and she sees these strange lights outside moving around and they're gradually coming, it seems like closer and closer. And she can't tell what they are. And then all of a sudden, this creature presses its gleaming eyes up against the glass and, breaks through the window and crawls inside. And I do remember feeling that one in my body. I remember looking at my window, like as a kid, kind of being like, hmm, like I had not been thinking about this object before, but now I'm feeling like I really want to make sure the blinds are shut. like, but I kept turning back to horror again and again. So I think it was also somehow really helpful for me. I think in a lot of these ways we've kind of touched on, there was something therapeutic about it, as well as just being fun and thrilling and transportive.
What I really like about Linda's answer is that it is tied to how she grew up and in the culture she did. So, and I feel very blessed that I have visited Taiwan. So I feel like a connection to what she's saying here. Growing up in Taiwan, ghosts and the supernatural are a huge part of daily life. We set out food offerings for the spirits to eat, burn paper money for the deceased to use in the afterlife. There's an entire month known as Hungry Ghost Month, with lots of taboos that can't be broken lest you want to attract unwanted attention from a ghost. I remember being very scared of these stories when I was young, but also absolutely fascinated and needing to know more. And that was likely where the love affair began, rooted in the spiritual and folklore beliefs of my culture. And that just so many warm feels from that answer.
I love that because I cannot relate necessarily to the fact that I was raised and brought up with our local lore. I was raised by a father, a mother too, but my father would sit me down with my little brother and we would watch horror movies all day instead of playing with dolls. I mean, I did play with dolls, Polly Pocket, shout out, and Barbies, of course. But I would sit down and watch Hellraiser, Leprechaun, anything that was terrifying. I grew up terrified, essentially. Thank you. Thank you, Father. But yes, it led me to imagine myself in those specific positions. And I also, as a writer, I was like, why are all of the bad guys so ugly looking? Or why are they all wearing black clothing? Or why are they all just like this, that, or the other? I wanted to understand why are all of them kind of carbon copies of one another. And then I started going to school and I was talking to my friends, and that's how I found out about our local lore. I literally am from a town whose mayor hunted for the chupacabra. Like literally. And I did not know that until I went to school. So it was interesting to see that it was always around me, but I was not tapped into it until socialization became a bigger thing in my life. Because if it were up to my father, it was just like, Freddy Krueger is the biggest threat you will ever face. And he's not wrong.
Shout out to Freddy Krueger.
Yes. And Shamile's answer is I remember reading Elsa Bornman's stories that still come to mind so many decades later and still scare me. I even added an Easter egg in my first book, Blizzard Besties, in honor of her stories that made me a reader and now a writer of horror.
Again, beautiful answers for everybody. I'm just gonna go into the next question. I don't have anything to add to because they're all beautiful. Thinking about horror in YA books, Do you think I lied? I'm going to go back and talk for a second. One thing that I find interesting and have been thinking about quite a bit, I promise it relates to this question. I feel like those of us of a certain age grew up in an era of really good horror stories. I mean, we had R.L. Stine, we had Christopher Pike, we had all of those point paperbacks that, like, so many of them were horror, right? And so there was an era for many of us where there was a lot of horror. Like, this was what was being sold to us. This is what we were able to find in libraries. This is what we were reading. I mean, I was taking out stacks, right? And just like blowing through them. And that is where I'm going with this next question. Thinking about why horror, do you think we're experiencing a horror renaissance right now? Do you think that YA has become better about different types and styles and flavor of horror that exist, and thus we're just seeing more books described that way? Or are writers writing more horror books? And maybe the answer is a little bit of both and. And whoever wants to take it away, run with it, please.
I'll go first because Linda's answer is short and really brutally honest. So I think that'll be a good way to start the conversation. As Linda said, YA horror like mine, a sapphic horror about Asian American pop stars, would not have gotten traditionally published when I was growing up. So I absolutely do think YA and especially horror has opened up to more diverse voices and authors from different backgrounds, thanks to the hard work of the marginalized authors who paved the way so that books like mine could enter the world. We've made a lot of progress, but with book bans rearing their ugly heads, it shows we still have a long way to go. And I'd like to add to this, Linda's book is up for the Bram Stoker Award for Superior Achievement in Young Adult, the next one in this world. It's not technically a sequel, but it's in the world. And she will be at StokerCon, and I'm so excited for her to see, others praising her work. And I think it segues really well into Amparo, into your books, because you have authors in there that are some of the people who paved the way, which I think is one of the things I love about the book.
You're absolutely right. And I think that in Latin America, you have horror as a bigger genre than it would be in mainstream US or English literature publishing, all of it. I think we grow up listening about these authors. Most of them are women, by the way, who are so successful across all genres, but specifically in horror. And you don't see that necessarily reflected in US literature, specifically for children. I thought that was so important for this anthology because I had multiple conversations with Yamile. Which authors should we invite? What's the scope of this? Who are we representing outside of just culture? And she was like, women and non binary authors, because those are the ones writing horror, publishing horror across Latin America. What do you mean? I was like, you know what? You're right. Yeah, I didn't want to say it, but you said it for me. So, yes, absolutely agree. And I think that when it comes to how important it is to reflect these stories, it's about connection, but most of all, propulsion. We cannot just stay in a specific space and call it a day. Well, we have one Black author, we have one Latin American author, there's one Asian here. There are several identities within one umbrella term for whichever identity you want to choose. So I think it's important to showcase that this is possible, but it's not the final result or the only answer. And that's mostly why we came up with this idea.
Yeah, like I really agree. I feel like we're just getting horror media across the board from more diverse perspectives. And I feel like as all these different aspects come into play, all these different identities and different elements that I feel like were sort of poo-pooed away from horror sometimes in the past, like more romances coming through, things like that, more like genre mashups are coming through. I feel like more and more readers are starting to finally see themselves in these stories. They're finally getting to feel like these stories are for them, and I feel like as people feel that way, they open up their definition of horror. They're less afraid of the label of horror because I do think there's like a still a good section of the populace in like American populace anyway of like that think about horror, and they still, some of them have this narrow definition, which is like slashers from the 70s to 90s, and they think, that's not for me, I don't touch that. But I do think now that is changing because there's so much more media from different perspectives, and I think it feeds both ways. I think creators and publishers are more willing to, give books the horror label now because folks are also more willing to pick up the horror label than they used to be. So I do think it is converging and coming together really beautifully.
And on that note, I fully agree, but it's kind of a prelude to what Yamile says. She writes, "We're truly experiencing a horror renaissance, especially in YA, which is a mirror of the book in romance. In my opinion, romance and horror are two sides of the same coin because they appeal to primal emotions, love and fear that all human beings experience no matter their background." And I also think it's a great way to expose readers of romance to horror and horror readers to romance. If you have that intersection, sometimes they can never go back. We've ruined them forever. They have to read horror romance or some romance with, like, they have to. It's just a manipulation tactic on our part.
And then
Yes,
we're
definitely.
all winning. We're all winning. I love
Yeah.
it. It is a competition, but we're gonna win. We're scarier, but we're also awesome. More awesome.
I mean, isn't romance kind of scary anyway?
Yes, terrifying.
I guess.
Mic drop. We could stop right there, right? Perfect. All of your answers kind of took me back to the very first meeting we had for this season of Summer Scares. Our speaker of honor, like our chair this year, honorary chair, is Jennifer McMahon. And one of the very first things she said was that she had been working on edits for her forthcoming book, and it was the first time her publisher had labeled her work horror. And she had published how many books beforehand that are certainly horror books, but this is the first time it got that label. And that to me really kind of spoke to exactly what y'all are talking about, is like laying it out there, calling it what it is, like, and trusting the reader understands what that is, I think has really helped pave the way and open up what is horror. Not just what's possible in horror, but what is horror and what we have been overlooking because, the voices that be have had such a narrow idea of what readers thought of horror, whereas readers think of horror in such a more expansive manner. Let's see. While we're talking about YA horror, are there one or two YA horror books that you think about frequently and or recommend regularly? And what is it about that book or books that make it so memorable?
I'm going to start with Shamile's answer because I think she's read way more books in general than I ever have. There are so many ways and middle grade horrors that I love. A forever favorite is The Forest of Hands and Teeth by Carrie Ryan. I read it yearly and I love the voice. The concept of an apocalyptic horror that also incorporates romance and the characters. The first decade of the 2000s were a golden age for scary romance books. Another favorite is A Tempest of Tea by Hafsa Faisal. Vampires, need I say more? And on a personal note,
You muted. Yeah.
yes, I tend to read more psychological horror instead of just straight up. Although my favorite mythical creature I would say is the zombie. I do love me some vampires, werewolves, and everyone else, ghosts as well. But I think zombies, anything zombie related, I'm going to devour because I know that I would never survive a zombie apocalypse in real life. So.
Yeah, I do have to agree with that personally for me as well. The not surviving part. Yeah, I feel like there's so many books I could shout out here, but I want to choose a couple. I want to choose What the Woods Took by Courtney Gould and Her Lips, My Voice by L.L. Madrid. So I really love emotional intimacy in my horror. Things like The Last of Us, where they have interesting relationships and that character growth is such a part of it. And I love well-designed monsters that bring out and heighten the characters' own arcs. I love immersive atmosphere. And both of those books, they're just really beautiful queer horrors. They have great female characters of grit. They're bittersweet, but ultimately hopeful. And I also want to give a special shout out to What the Woods Took by Courtney Gould for engaging with mental health so beautifully. Horror, of course, has a rough history with mental health representation. And that is something that is important to me. I have bipolar 3, and so A Place for Vanishing, the main character, also has bipolar 3. I love to see it integrated compassionately and honestly. So, So yeah, I think those are going to get my shout outs today.
And then Linda said, as a new immigrant who is still struggling to learn the language, I credit R.L. Stein's Goosebumps and Fear Street series for not only helping me learn English, but really cultivating my love of reading horror books. Those books were incredibly fun page turners and, most importantly, accessible. And it made reading far less intimidating because I just wanted to know what happens next. They are classics, but I still highly recommend them to any reluctant readers or English language learners. And I do want to say, I want to add, as the librarian here, I see that that is also always something that works really well. I worked with a lot of English language learners, and I've talked to other people, and they say things like, if they're adults, things like Stephen King, and even knowing he is a racist, that Lovecraft has also helped them understand language as well. But this Fear Street and Goosebumps, they are such great books to give to anyone, but especially people who are English language learners. I double down on that.
These are all fantastic recommendations, each and every one of them. Since we have touched on it, we're gonna just go full in here. Because this is a library-centered program, let's talk about the role the library plays in your life as a kid and even now.
Yeah, so Kelly, you were talking about earlier, like going to the library and leaving with the like teetering stacks of books and many of them horror. Like, yeah, that was me too. Like as a kid, um, I love that. I still remember how my childhood library smells. Like, I just have that like sense memory attached to it because it was important to me then. And um, it's really cool now getting to be on the other end of the cycle because now I'm the parent taking like my kid to the library and yeah, and then we even use the like playrooms in our local libraries. So libraries have just been kind of such a great support for me throughout my life, first as a kid and then also now as a parent.
In my case, I grew up very much a reluctant reader. I would favor films and television over books. And my first language is Spanish, but I tend to feel like English is my first language because I think in English. I like talking in English more with people who can understand the type of English that I want to speak, which is very casual and very fast. So in my case, I grew up looking at the library as more of like a means to an A plus. I was going there to research, I was going there to do all of my assignments. And then it wasn't until I was almost graduating high school that I said to myself, maybe I should read for fun. And that's when I started developing a more intimate relationship with literature that was not boring old people, old men specifically, that I was forced to read and learn about against my will, and that didn't reflect my reality at all. So I think that doing that for myself, making that choice, took a long time, but I'm so happy. I think it landed exactly when it needed to. And there are no accidents. Everything that I read, even if I didn't like it, I still remember why I didn't like it, and I still remember how it impacted me in that time.
I can do Linda before we go back to Amparo for more. So Linda had a great story too. Linda said, the library was a huge part of my life as a new immigrant. I needed English tutoring to help with my language, and most of that was done at the library. Reading the Goosebumps series and other spooky middle grade books was what cemented my lifelong love of reading. And now being able to walk into that same library and see my books on the shelves has been the absolute best, most full circle moment. I am also a youth writing workshop leader at my local library. It means so much to me to be able to help support and nurture the next generations of writers. So shout out for giving back. This, all of Summer Scares is giving back. So thank you all for doing that. Before we get to the last description, there was a quick question that Anne can answer quickly. The name of one of the books the two books you mentioned in your last answer.
hmm so the first one was What the Woods Took by Courtney Gould. And the other was Her Lips, My Voice by L.L. Madrid.
Thank you. I didn't want that to get lost.
Yes, so Shamile's answer is growing up, we didn't have books in my house other than the dictionary and the Bible, but I loved books so much. My school library was my savior, and I must have read every book in that tiny room over the years. We didn't have a library in the neighborhood when I was growing up, as my country was still recovering from the dictatorship that started at the end of the 70s. Even in the 80s and 90s, democracy was slow to trickle down to the people. But the library as an institution has always been revered by my culture. In the neighborhood in which I was born, the library La Vigile was established by immigrants so their children could have access to books. With time, it became a publishing house and educational center, a beacon of the arts in Latin America. The authoritarian government intervened in 1977, burning the books and jailing and killing the librarians. Today, the site is a museum in memoriam of the desaparecidos, or the disappeared ones. This event is featured in my upcoming book, Hear Ye Mortals, a historical YA novel set in Argentina. While it's not horror per se, the events that transpired are horrific, as they mirror a lot of the things happening in the US today, with book bannings and detention centers.
These are really powerful answers from everyone. Because I want to leave a little bit of time at the end for anybody who is joining us and wants to ask a question, I'm going to give my last question now to everybody on the panel, which is, again, pretty low ball, and we'll probably build our attendees' reading list. And it's, what are you reading right now, or a book that you are a mad champion for that you think more people need to read and shout about?
Linda has a great couple answers here. I'm currently reading House of the Beast by Michelle Wong. And I'd like to shout out my fellow Taiwanese Canadian author, Judy I. Lin's YA horror, The Dark Becomes Her, set in Vancouver's Chinatown, as well as Corey Liu's He's So Possessed with Me, a queer YA horror that is Jennifer's Body Meets Heartstopper. And I'm putting that on hold like now. So thank you, Linda.
I've just finished reading The Poet Empress by Shen Tao, which is not horror, but it horrified me. And I think the last horror novel I read this year was Lucy Rose's The Lamb. I am a huge fan of anything, as Anne was mentioning, in terms of mental health. Raquel Marie, not to shout out someone from Our Shadows Have Claws, but Raquel Marie has a book that came out last year, If We Survive This. As I mentioned, zombies are my thing, so it's a zombie apocalypse. The main character is battling with grief and OCD, and she's not sure if she wants to actually survive the zombie apocalypse. And quick shout out to one of my personal heroes, Courtney Summers. She has a novel called This Is Not a Test, which, again, zombies and someone who is struggling with mental health in a way that doesn't let them truly survive in a world that is requiring her to do so.
And there goes my TBR. That sounds awesome. Okay, so actually, the book I'm reading right now is Our Shadows Have Claws, which we all know about. But yet another voice to say it's a beautiful anthology. So I'm really loving that. And the book I read right before that was The Undead Truth of Us by Brittany S. Lewis. And so that one uses zombie imagery as a metaphor for grief. And because this is a horror panel, I do want to point out, I don't think I mean, horror is used to describe it. There are touches of that, but it is more metaphorical. It's not like, there's kind of like thrilling zombie beats, but it is the imagery. There are touches of body horror. And throughout it reads a little more like a contemporary YA with strong romance. And it's just beautifully surreal. And I honestly feel like it's one that I haven't read anything quite like. And anytime that happens, I get really excited. So I want to mention that one too.
Yes, and Yamile says it's an adult horror, but Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Basterrica is perhaps the best horror I've read in recent years. Side note, I have also read it and I devoured it. I was like, give me more of this, please. I
That
think
is an
about it
interesting word
constantly.
choice that you devoured
Yeah,
it.
yeah, give me more of this, please, devoured. In terms of YA, everything Ryan La Sala writes has me reading up until the wee hours of the night. Shout out to Ryan as well.
All right. I think everybody got that. I'm gonna do something I did not prepare for and did not prepare y'all for. But I know I just got beautiful like looks of shock. But given how much the topic has come up, I'm curious, and I feel like this is a fun way to round out like the formal panel questions. But what is your zombie survival tactic?
as the main lover of zombies, my tactic would be to cry and let them take me. That's it. I'm not fighting against the inevitable, and I accept what happens next.
Yeah, this is dark comedy perhaps as an answer, but so for a while, like I had this series of zombie nightmares that started after I watched The Walking Dead, and it would be like almost every night would just be like this like actually horrific zombie nightmare. And it's funny because before that I was like not scared of zombies. I did not get the zombie thing, and this is weird because I wrote What We Harvest, but back then I was just like, ah, I'm not into it. And these nightmares were like torturing me until I got to the point where like in one of them I just like Dream Me just gave up and was like, all right, that's it. Everybody gather around. We're gonna have a talk. This is gonna go poorly. I am so sorry. Mom, you're a little too slow. You're not gonna make it. Happens every time. So I'm just gonna tell you now. I'm gonna tell us all now. We can all just prepare mentally because doom is a coming. Like so that's what got me through my zombie nightmares. In a real zombie apocalypse, I think I would I'm very clumsy. I don't think it would go well.
Kelly, you have to answer this too, but I obviously have had many of these conversations in my life with people. And my husband and I have decided, and Kelly and I live in the Midwest, but we would go to Menards because Menards has everything. It's a big like Midwest hardware store, but it has food. It has, you don't need guns, right? People are like, I'm gonna go to a store with guns. I'm like, guns are really hard. Do you know how to shoot a gun? Can you shoot a zombie exactly in the head? I can hit a zombie in the head, right? But I've never shot a gun. I've never held a gun, let alone shot a gun. So it has some weapons. It has lots of it has lots of doors, but you can bar them all, right? But then the other thing is that I am also realistic. I must guard my glasses at all costs because once they go, I am dead. I'm probably dead anyway, but you know. What about you, Kelly? I want to hear your answer.
The thing that I always think about, like, I don't know how hard I would want to fight, right? Like, I don't know what I've got with that. But, like, the first tactic I would do is go somewhere where there's a boat and get on some water. Like, get out in the middle of a lake, get out in the middle of the ocean, because how's a zombie going to get to you, right? If it's in the boat, sure. But, like, at least getting on the water, you're buying yourself a little time.
That actually brings up one of my favorite sort of YA adult crossover horror novels, which is The Reapers Were the Angels by Alden Bell. And all of it, and it's a really great YA adult crossover novel, all of it is set on an island, basically. And that's how these people stayed safe. So, yeah.
So we've got a few minutes, and I would love to open it up to anybody who has questions. And we do have one in here that I'm going to go ahead and read because I think that everybody's going to have really great answers for this one. And the question is, as writers for young people, how do you assuage fears or discomfort around the idea that young people enjoy stories that are dark, gruesome, or shocking? Where do you draw the line in your own writing for what content is too much for teens?
So
Well,
personally, I feel like oh, I'm so sorry. It's okay, Anne. I'll be quick. So personally, I feel like with me, I was that teenager. I was looking for darkness, or not darkness itself. I was looking for the light in the darkness. Let's just put it that way. And my personal strategy or my approach to it is no topic necessarily is off limits, but the way that you show that topic is what you can control and what you can manage based on reading age or age level. I think it's not necessarily about there are specific things you can't talk about because they're hearing about it, they are thinking about it, they're learning about it. It's in complete visibility for them most of the time. So pretending like they don't see or don't read or don't hear is really just a damaging thing to do for young readers. But I think it's all about how you present the story because nothing can feel gratuitous if it doesn't serve a purpose or if it's not there for a reason. Why are you putting it in there? And I think horror tends to have that reputation because of films and shows, not so much books. We have to manage expectations, taking into consideration that not everything, just because it's horrifying, doesn't necessarily mean it belongs in a book.
yeah, I very much agree with that. I think that's true. I do feel like we have to give teens credit. They are unfortunately aware of the world around them. It is a dark place. It is dark times. They are aware. So yeah, I think I think that that's really it, right? Is it's like you find the meaningful moments to share, you know. So when I like am writing body horror or something like that, you know, that kind of a moment, I will ask myself, like, is this detail important to the character's growth, to their arc, to this moment? Does it contribute to kind of the feeling we really need in this scene? Or not. And I also have, you know, readers and editors who can react to that too, and might be kind of like, okay, you no, we don't have the stomach for that one. So I do think that one's a little bit of a moving target, but I think if it serves a purpose, if it's part of the story, then it can be important. You obviously don't want to have things that are just gratuitous, and haunt people's nightmares for no reason.
And Anne, have
Not,
you had the
oh,
experience where an editor has like told you to get more dark or go further?
Heavens, yes. Actually,
Yeah.
like in
Okay. I
a
was like,
place for
oh, okay,
vanishing.
you want me to go more. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, like it was really funny because I wrote A Place for Vanishing in one of the earlier drafts. You know, like my readers beforehand were like, "This is really scary." I sent it to my editor, and she was just like, "More, more, more." And like there were a couple scenes that were pretty intense that some of my readers were like, "Is this too much?" And she's like, "This is my favorite scene." So every time I'd be like, "Heads up, guys, the next draft's getting scarier." So
Yeah, please blame our editors for anything that disturbed you.
there you go.
One of the things I love, and I know Kelly loves, you can talk about this a little too, because we pick these books, right? And Kelly is our YA expert. And I worked for 15 years with teens, and I know that the two of us only champion books for this, you know, designation as summer scares that speak truth to the teens, right? That don't hold back. And sometimes that's in the gore and in the violence, sometimes it's in other issues, but like both of you have said, they can take a lot, but we want to make sure that it's not just the gratuitous as people are asking. But there are times, yes, where there needs to be more, you know, and we will only consider books that are authentic in that way.
And we spend a lot of our discussion thinking about balancing the types of horror when we pull together. We're picking 3 books a year, right? So we want to think about the books that are going to reach those readers who really do love that blood and guts and gore piece of horror. But we want to also have options for readers who are like, that is not my thing at all. I'm skeptical of horror. Like, these are books that are great places for them to go to really understand just like how broad horror really is. And we think about that, you know, in the 3 books we pick each year, but also in context of the other books that we have picked each
Yeah.
year. So I don't know. One of my favorite things about doing this is talking about these very topics. Like, we know that some of these books are going to be dark and really dark, but there's also going to be books on the list that are light, that are funny horror, because I think that that gets overlooked sometimes, that like horror can be downright hilarious sometimes. And I think we have adult sensibilities. I think younger readers, teens especially, find a lot more humor in the horror than we do just because we've experienced a lot more. And so our brains are wired for a little bit more like, oh, that's really horrifying, not funny. Whereas her teens are like, oh, that's pretty funny. And I think that those reactions are all valid. And I think it also speaks to exactly what we talked about in that first question, in that horror elicits a reaction. And that is one of the things that makes it such a cool mood to read, such a cool area to play in and think about and to promote. Um, I
I
think
want
I,
to go back to the zombie question though, because you even said that we've experienced more, and your reaction is an adult reaction. Somebody's not going to outrun them. The teens are like, I got this. I'm
yeah.
faster. Yeah. Like, I just made me think of it. Like, that's just a really literal example of what you said, Kelly, but it's totally true.
Oh, yeah.
It is. Yeah, my characters are like, we can do
Yeah,
it.
exactly. They are because they can.
They haven't
Yes,
been
they
beat down
can.
by life yet.
They've got it.
And all their joints work great.
Yeah, I think one thing I also wanted to add on this too is like I think that this is one thing that's beautiful about genre fiction in general, but also horror is that that also provides a safer space to process these darker things that people experience, right? So, you know, if we talk about it through the lens of monsters or, you know, whatever it is, that can make it easier to deal with those real feelings that are there and can ironically be a safer place for teens to deal with some of this stuff.
Absolutely. I've got one more question in the Q&A that I want to get to before our time is out. And the question is, I think it's a really great one to end on too. So I'm a librarian and writing hobbyist who runs a writing workshop for teens. Do you have any recommendations for teens who want to practice writing horror? For example, how to get inspired or writing exercises that get your own creativity flowing?
I think my main recommendation would be to live your life and notice what scares you on a personal level. And as you discover that, you will be able to understand why it's not that scary to others or why something is scary to someone else and not to you. Because as we were mentioning, a lot of people would probably go and watch a movie and laugh at the gory scenes or wherever terrible is supposed to happen. It's not going to affect them. Why is that? Why are we so different? That's going to tell you what kind of writer you want to be as well. Do you want to portray things that you've personally been through or that you've lived through? Or do you want to imagine the horrors themselves? Just take whatever it is that's necessary from your surroundings and build upon them.
I think that's a really beautiful approach. Yeah, my answer is less beautiful and more technical. But but yeah, that made me think of Save the Cat writes a novel. Actually, the monster in the house section, it gives kind of like three components of what you need for a horror book. You need a monster, you need a house, some kind of enclosed space, you need a sin, some reason that the monster is coming for the characters in particular. Formulas can be a great place to build off of. It doesn't mean the book is going to feel formulaic, but I do think it can be a great starting point for ideas. Those three components, I think, actually can be really helpful. So I'd point to that section of Save the Cat Writes a Novel.
Share something from Jennifer McMahon because I don't think it's out yet, but we did a Summer Scares podcast for Booklist. And one of the things she shared, and she's our spokesperson this year, is that when she turned 50, she got tattooed right here, write what scares you, which is what Amparo was saying. And, we're talking about a New York Times, multiple best-selling author. And she said that is her inspiration every day. Write what scares you. So, I think that all of this advice is great, but I wanted to share Jennifer's, opinion too.
And just to put a really nice bow on this conversation, I think one of the other things that can be really potent is simply pulling out a bunch of horror novels, including the ones by the writers on this, having your teens read the first page and then writing after. What happens, right? Like you don't know the whole story maybe, but you get that first page and you get a sense of the setting. You are dropped into this space. All right, what happens? There's your prompt. You're not going to write the same book. You're not going to write the same story because your experiences are different, but you take the pressure off that first page syndrome of getting stuck of where to start. You've got your starting point. Run with it.
I love that. And since we're doing stuff with the horror writers, I want to let everyone out there know who is a teen librarian. We give out $250 scholarships every summer to teen librarians who do programming for teens. And if you want to run that program and you want to get some money to buy the books, go to horror.org. And it's going to be the Young Adults Right Now Scholarship. And we give out up to 5 every year, $250. And that's a great idea for a program, Kelly.
Former librarian, let me tell you, sometimes the programs are just as, straightforward as you can imagine. Sometimes we overthink what we have to do. Meanwhile, everybody on this panel, everybody who's attended, listened to 2 first pages and knew everything there was to know about what horror feels like. All right, run with it, right? Well, thank you so much, Anne and Amparo, for being here, to Yamile and Linda, who were not here but did share their answers with us. This has been a really wonderful discussion. Tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's video recording, Summer Scares programming guide, and a certificate of completion. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones. And don't forget to register for our final Summer Scares panel happening later this week. Sign up is on the Booklist website. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. One more huge thank you to our panelists, Anne and Amparo, and Becky for playing the role of Linda here, and Amparo for playing the role of Yamile. Thank you for helping us celebrate summer scares this year.
Bye, guys. Thank you.